Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are continuing to learn Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We'll be learning today Mirz Hashem Tav Chaf Aleph Amud Beis. We continue to learn Hilchos Chalamayid. We are in the midst of Siman Tav Kuf Mem Ches, learning the halachos of aveilus on Chalamayid, mourning on Chalamayid, and we pick up today on the bottom line of Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph with Siman Tav Kuf Mem Ches Sif Ches. Says the Mechaber, Im Nahag Shiva, if somebody lost one of the close relatives that he has to sit Shiva for, and he kept Shiva for 7 days, Upaga by Haregel, and now after Shiva, it's Yom Tov time. So usually in a typical situation of mourning, first the mourner keeps Shiva, and then after Shiva he keeps Shloshim. But now he finished Shiva, and now Yom Tov comes. Mevatel mimenu gzeras shloshim. The arrival of Yom Tov breaks the shloshim, and now he will not keep shloshim anymore. Says, there's no Mishnah Berurah here yet. Okay. Continues the Mechaber on the top of Chaf Aleph Amud Beis. Afilu chal yom Shiva be'erev haregel. Let's say the final day of Shiva, day 7, is Erev Yom Tov. Mutter lesaper ulechabes be'erev haregel. The ava will be allowed to take a haircut. He'll be allowed to do laundry and wash nicely freshly cleaned clothing on Erev Yom Tov. So he kept Shiva, and Erev Yom Tov is the last day of the Shiva. On the last day of Shiva, he'll be able to go take a haircut, even though normally you wouldn't take a haircut during Shloshim. He'll be able to do laundry and wash and wear freshly cleaned clothing. He'll be able to do all of that on Erev Yom Tov. Explains the Chavetz Chaim in Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Chavtes. Afilu chal yom shvi be'erev haregel. This is true even if the last day of Shiva falls out on Erev Yom Tov. Now, the reason for the afilu, what's the Mechaber saying, even if the last day of Shiva falls out on Erev Yom Tov? Well, we learned previously, when does Yom Tov negate Shiva? Yom Tov negates Shiva in a case where you started sitting Shiva before the arrival of Yom Tov. If somebody passed away, let's say 2 days before Yom Tov, so the aveilus began sitting Shiva before Yom Tov, then the arrival of Yom Tov negates the rest of the Shiva. It's mevatel the Shiva. However, if the avel never had the chance to start sitting Shiva before Yom Tov, let's say the person passed away right before Yom Tov, and the aveilus simply didn't have a chance to sit Shiva even for a little bit of time before Yom Tov, then Yom Tov is not mevatel Shiva. Then the Shiva begins after Yom Tov. Now we're not dealing with Shiva. We're dealing over here in this sif, we're dealing with the halacha of Shloshim, not the halacha of Shiva. In the case that we're discussing here, what happened? Somebody died 7 days before Yom Tov, and the aveilus are keeping Shiva, and now the 7th day of Shiva falls out on Erev Yom Tov. In that case, does Yom Tov break the Shiva or not? Normally, you would be tempted to look at this and say, well, Erev Yom Tov is the last day of Shiva. But if it's the last day of Shiva, it's not the first day of Shloshim. The Shloshim didn't begin yet. We're just ending the Shiva. So maybe Yom Tov should not be mevatel the Shloshim. It should be the same halacha as if, let's say, the aveilus didn't have a chance to start Shiva before Yom Tov, then Yom Tov doesn't break the Shiva. So if the Shloshim didn't really start yet, maybe we should say that the Yom Tov doesn't break the Shloshim, and Shloshim should pick up after Yom Tov. But the Mishnah Berurah explains that that's not the case. Why? Let's take a look here. Mishnah Berurah's Katan Chavtes. Afilu chal yom shvi be'erev haregel. Even if the 7th day of Shiva is Erev Yom Tov will negate the rest of Shloshim. Why? Explains the Chavetz Chaim. Because when it comes to Hilchos Aveilus, we always apply the rule of miktsas hayom kikuloi, that a small part of the day is equal to the entire day. Lefikach, therefore, Yom Shvi, the 7th day of Shiva, oila loy lekan ulekan. It applies and it counts towards both sides. It counts as the last day of Shiva, like the Chavetz Chaim says, Tchilas Yom Hashvi, the very beginning of the seventh day, Hu Tashlom Hashiva, that completes the Shiva. Miktas Hayom Kekulai, so a little bit of time in the morning of the seventh day counts for the complete seventh day. That means that you completed sitting Shiva. That's why even nowadays, when do aveilus get up from Shiva? They get up in the morning on the seventh day. Usually they daven Shachris, they sit for a few minutes, people come, they say, Amakim Yinachem Eschem, and then they get up from Shiva, because Miktzas Hayom Kekuloi, a small amount of time in the morning on the beginning of day 7, that counts as a full day 7, so the morning of day 7 completes the Shiva. V'achakach, and after that time, after a little bit of time in the morning of day 7, when you have already completed the Shiva, Maschil Yom Shmini. Now it begins day 8, Tehu Nechshav Mehaschala Shloishim, which means that now the period when the halachos of Shloishim apply, without the halachos of Shiva, that's why we call it the beginning of Shloishim, even though technically, what do you mean the beginning of Shloishim? Day 8 is not the first day of 30. The day of the Kfura is the first day of the Shloishim. The Shiva is the first 7 days of the Shloishim. But for the first 7 days, you're not keeping the dinim of Shloishim, you're keeping the dinim of Shiva. On day 8, that's when you start beginning the halachas of Shloishim. So day 7, the morning is the completion of Shiva, and then after that begins the beginning of the Shloishim period. That means that we now began the Shloishim before Yom Tov arrived. Oh, so then Yom Tov is going to be mevatel l'shloishim. It's going to break the shloishim. So ein tzarich lishmar su klom la'achar regel min hashloishim. So now, after Yom Tov, you don't have to continue keeping shloishim. Certainly on the regel, you're not keeping the dinim of shloishim. And now after Yom Tov, you don't have to continue keeping shloishim, because Yom Tov breaks and ends the shloishim. The baha regel umafsikai, because the Yom Tov arrives and the Yom Tov negates and breaks off the shloishim. V'yoser mizeh, and furthermore, says the Chavetz Chaim, ta'afilu b'zeh hayom gufa, even on day 8, which is Erev Yom Tov itself, mutar legaleach ulechabeis afilu begihutz. You could go ahead and shave and take a haircut, and you could do laundry, even gihutz, even pressing and professionally cleaning, mishum kavod regel, because you're allowed to do this on Erev Yom Tov, even though Yom Tov didn't begin yet. So you might make an argument like this. You might say, okay, the morning of day 7 completed the Shiva, and now the Shloishim began. But why could you go take a haircut and shave and launder and everything else on Erev Yom Tov? Why doesn't the arrival of Yom Tov that night should break the Shloishim? Why does the Shloishim break now? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, afilu b'zeh yom gufa, even on day 7 itself, you could already mutar legalech ulechabes afilu begiyutz mishum k'vod haregel, because you're not going to be allowed to do these things lekavod Yom Tov tonight. It's Yom Tov, so you can do them on Erev Yom Tov. Okay. Now we go back to the top line of the Shulchan Aruch, to the words of the Ramah. Haga, the Ramah says, V'hu hadin harechitza l'didan, d'noyagin issa rechitza kol shloishim. The Ramah paskins in Yeridei and Hilchos aveilus that an avel does not bathe during shloishim. An avel is not allowed to bathe during Shiva. The Ramah in Yeridei says that an avel also does not bathe during the shloishim. I believe we generally paskin that nowadays we all have the din of an istinus. We're all considered very finicky, nitpicky people, and therefore we do bathe during shloishim. However, the Ramah here says, even according to his shita, v'hu din harechitza l'didan, even according to us, where denayag and issa rechitza kol shloishim, where we generally say that an avel does not bathe for the entire shloishim, he's allowed to bathe on Erev Yom Tov. However, the Ramah says that bathing should take place samach la'erev, closer to nightfall on Erev Yom Tov, right before Yom Tov. But ve'ein tzarich lahamtin ad halayla. He could bathe close to nightfall. He doesn't have to wait till after nightfall. Now you might jump up right away and say, what do you mean he doesn't have to wait until after nightfall? Of course he can't bathe after nightfall. You don't bathe on Yom Tov. So like we're going to see in the Mishnah Berurah, the Ramah is referring to bathing in cold water. You might say that maybe the oval should have to wait until Yom Tov night in order to bathe, and he should bathe in cold water, which is technically mutter. So the Ramah says no. Ein tzarich lahamten ad halayla. He doesn't have to wait until after nightfall. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cotton lamid v'hu adin harachitza ledidan denayagin ritzayin loymar. What the Ramah wants to say over here is af ledidan, even according to us, da ba'alma noihagin iser rechitza kol shloishim, where, like I told you, the Ramah says in Yeridea that an oval does not bathe during the shloishim. Mikamakam be'inyonenu. Over here, where we're talking about a case where the shloishim is technically beginning on Erev Yom Tov, einoi chamer mitispiris, we're definitely not going to say that bathing is more stringent, is treated more stringently la halacha than taking a haircut. Taking a haircut is more stringent in halachos aveilus than bathing. And therefore, since we see that the Mechaber says over here that you would be allowed to take a haircut on Erev Yom Tov in the case that we're describing, certainly you would be allowed to do rechitza b'chamin, you would be allowed to wash in hot water. The Ramah says samach la'erev. The Ramah says that the bathing should take place close to nightfall. Why? We want it to be very clear that the reason the avel is bathing is because of kavod haregel. If he takes a bath early in the morning, somebody might say, oh, he's taking a bath because he was an avel, he just got up from Shiva, he wasn't allowed to bathe for 7 days, he wants to take a bath. No, the reason we're being matter him to take a bath today is because of kavod haregel. That's the only reason we're matter it. So we tell him to wait until close to Yom Tov, so it's clear he's taking a bath l'kavod haregel. In this halacha hu afilu mechal yom shmini yochi be'erev haregel. This halacha that the Ramah says that bathing should be delayed until right before Yom Tov, that's true even in a case where it's not day 7 of Shiva that falls out on Erev Yom Tov. It's day 9 that falls out on Erev Yom Tov. You see, if it's day 7 that falls out on Erev Yom Tov, so we understand that we're treating that very strictly, because like we said a few minutes ago, you might think, okay, day 7 is really the first day of the Shloshim, and it's the arrival of Yom Tov that's going to break the Shloshim. So maybe that's why the Ramah is being so stringent on Erev Yom Tov, and he's saying delay Rechitza until close to Yom Tov. Because really, he should be usher in Rechitza today. It's really Shloshim. The Shloshim isn't broken until the arrival of Yom Tov. But let's say it's day 9. Let's say it's day 9. What I'm saying doesn't really make sense. 1 second. I'm sorry, bear with me for 1 moment. What's the afilu? That's what I'm struggling with here. V'ze'adin hu afilu imchal yoim shmini. If it's day 7, I guess if it's day 7, it's easier to understand why the Ramah says delay the rechitza until close to nightfall, because not only is day 7 the first day of the Shloshim, it's also the last day of Shiva. But if it's day 8 or it's day 9, it's not the last day of Shiva, it's only Shloshim. So maybe you would say that you could already take a bath already earlier in the day. Kamash Malan, the Mishnah Berurah is coming to tell me that even day 8 or day 9, where it's only a din of Shloshim, and it's not negeh Shiva at all, Shiva of course is already over, still you have to delay the bathing until close to nightfall. Okay. Continues the Chavetz Chaim in Ois Katan Lamed Aleph. V'dafka b'chol erev Yom Tov. This halacha of delaying until nightfall only is on a typical erev Yom Tov. Aval be'erev Pesach, but if we're dealing with erev Pesach is a different din than any other erev Yom Tov. Then mutter b'koil achar chatzos. Then you're already mutter in everything: haircut, shaving, laundering, showering, bathing, already after chatzos, earlier in the day, even according to the Ramah. Dahainu mizman shchitas haPesach ve'elach. Because let's remember, Mirz Hashem, it should be negeya to us this year that the Korban Pesach is generally brought after chatzos. So once you hit chatzos on erev Pesach, you're already entering into the zman shchitas haPesach. Those who Yom Tov the Aser b'malacha. The reason why there's an Isser Malacha on Erev Pesach after Chatzos is because that's already the time of the Hakrava, of the bringing of the Korban Pesach. And when a person brings a Korban, it's a Yom Tov hulai. That's considered a shtikal a Yom Tov. So there's already dinim of Yom Tov that apply when we hit the Zman of Shchitas HaPesach. Even though we don't have a din of Yom Tov nowadays, unfortunately, after Chatzos, because unfortunately we're not Zoicha, we're not bringing the Korban Pesach, but with Hashem, b'meher v'yameinu, we should have the binyan Beis HaMikdash. It still is the Zman Shchitas HaPesach, so there still is a little bit of a din of Yom Tov during that time period, Erev Pesach after Chatzos, and therefore for an oval, all of these things would already be mutter on Erev Pesach after Chatzos. V'chein b'kibus, laundering would also be mutter. Rechitza would be mutter, laundering would be mutter. Aval legaleach, but when it comes to taking a haircut, mutter afilu koydem Chatzos. That would be mutter for an oval in our case, even before Chatzos on Erev Pesach. Not only do you not have to wait until close to nightfall like the Ramah wanted to be machmir, not only is it mutter even already after Chatzos because it's the Zman Shchitas HaPesach, on Erev Pesach, Giluach, taking a haircut would be mutter for the oval even before Chatzos. Why? The Acher also loy legaleach Acher Chatzos k'di Isa b'Hilchos Pesach, because in Siman Tov Samach Sif Hey, we learned that a barber is not allowed to give haircuts after Chatzos on Erev Pesach. So if we're going to tell the oval that he could take a haircut after Chatzos on Erev Pesach, who is he going to find to give him a haircut? Nobody's going to be open. Nobody's going to give him a haircut. He's going to have to give himself a haircut, which is difficult. Therefore, we're matter him to take a haircut even before Chatzos. Ois Katan Lamed Beis, the Ramah said that you could do rechitza, the oval could bathe samach la'erev, close to nightfall, and then the Ramah said ve'ein tzarich lahamtin ad halayla, he doesn't have to wait until nightfall. Says the Chavetz Chaim is Katan Lamed Beis ve'ein tzarich lahamtin ad halayla, he doesn't have to wait until after nightfall. Kai arachitza. These words of the Ramah are referring specifically to the question of bathing. He doesn't have to wait to bathe until after nightfall. He could bathe close to nightfall. De'ilu tispeires ukvisa, because if you're going to tell me that the Ramah is referring to taking a haircut and laundering, he can't be referring to those things. Ba'layla asur. You're not allowed to take a haircut or launder after nightfall on the night of Yom Tov. These things are malachos, they're asur on Yom Tov. Rechitza, bathing, there's a way to render it permissible on Yom Tov. You could take a cold bath. Now, negei halacha l'maisa, that's a problem as far as schita with the hair and with towels, etc., etc. So I don't want to go there. Don't take away from this. Oh, Rabbi Weiss said you're allowed to take a cold bath on Yom Tov. But when it comes specifically to the halacha of rechitza, it makes sense for the Ramah to tell you a chiddush that the oval, in our case, he could go ahead and he could do rechitza, he could bathe samach la'erev, close to nightfall, and he doesn't have to wait until after nightfall, because it's possible to bathe after nightfall. But in the context of taking a haircut and laundering, there's no possibility of doing that after nightfall. It's asur. Okay, now we go back up to the Shulchan Aruch. Let's continue with the words of the Shulchan Aruch after the Ramah, 3 lines down in the middle of the line. Continues the Mechaber. Ve'ein tzarich loymar. There's no need to say, let's say the 8th day after the Ptira and the Kfura falls out on Shabbos, which is Erev Yom Tov. So they ended Shiva on Friday. Shiva was over on Friday, and Erev Yom Tov is Shabbos. Says the Mechaber, there's no need for me to tell you that in that case, Nispatel Mimen, I skipped a line, Shemuter L'saper Be'erev Shabbos, certainly in that case, the oval would be allowed to take a haircut on Erev Shabbos. Now, if you take a look in the Bir Halacha over here, Dibra Maschil V'Ein Tzarech Loimar Imchal, the Chavetz Chaim explains what the Mechaber is saying over here. Nakat Lishna V'Ein Tzarech Loimar. The Mechaber is telling me there's no need to say. We just dealt with one particular case. Until now, we were dealing in a case where the last day of Shiva was Erev Yom Tov. And we said if the last day of Shiva is Erev Yom Tov, then the Aval is allowed to go ahead and take a haircut. He's allowed to bathe on Erev Yom Tov, even though technically that's the first day of Shloshim. It doesn't matter because Yom Tov, which is coming that night, is going to break the Shloshim, and he's allowed to do these things on Erev Yom Tov, L'tzarech HaRegel, he's allowed to do them, L'chvod HaRegel. Now the Mechaber said, there's no need for me to tell you another case. That's the case where the Shiva ended on Friday, but Friday is not Erev Yom Tov. Shabbos is Erev Yom Tov. So now, do we allow him to take a haircut on Erev Shabbos? It's not Erev Yom Tov. Is he allowed to do it? So the Mechaber said, certainly. I don't even have to tell you that. Says the Bir Halacha, Nakat Lishna V'Ein Tzarech Loimar. The Mechaber says this, and he says, I don't even have to tell you that. Why? Mishum dekeshalmu lo shmona yamim kaidem haregel. If Friday is already the last day of Shiva, that means that Shabbos, which is Erev Yom Tov, is already day 8. Bevadai pshita da haregel mevatel gzera shloshim. Then we know for a fact that the arrival of Yom Tov is going to negate the shloshim. Remember what we said at the beginning of this year. At the beginning of this year, we said that if the last day of Shiva is Erev Yom Tov, then it's a chiddush that Yom Tov negates the shloshim. Why? Because you might look at it and you might say, well, today Erev Yom Tov is really the last day of Shiva. Tomorrow, the first day of Yom Tov, is really what was scheduled to be the first day of Shloshim. So maybe we should look at this and we should say, Shloshim never started before Yom Tov. And if Shloshim didn't start before Yom Tov, then Yom Tov should not negate the Shloshim, and the Shloshim should continue after Yom Tov. We said no. We said a chiddush, since the last day of Shiva, Miktas Hayom Kekuloi, the last day of Shiva serves as the last day of Shiva and the last day of Shloshim, and therefore the arrival of Yom Tov negates the Shloshim, and since the arrival of Yom Tov negates the Shloshim, we're makel in the Hilchas aveilus, and we allow the oval to take a haircut on Erev Yom Tov l'chvod haregel. Now, says the Chavetz Chaim, in our new case that we're discussing here, where the Shiva ended on Friday, and Shabbos is Erev Yom Tov, then certainly the Shloshim began before Yom Tov, because Shabbos is the first day of Shloshim. Then we know for sure that Yom Tov is going to negate Shloshim. And if we know for sure that Yom Tov is going to negate Shloshim on Sunday, right, because the first day of Yom Tov is Sunday, so if we know that Motzi Shabbos, Yom Tov is going to arrive, and it's certainly going to negate the Shloshim, there's no chiddush in that, because Shabbos Erev Yom Tov was the bona fide first day of Shloshim, so then certainly on Erev Shabbos, we're going to allow him to take a haircut l'chvod haregel, because it's something that he can't do on Shabbos. He can't take a haircut on Shabbos. So certainly, on Erev Shabbos, knowing for certain that Yom Tov and Motzei Shabbos is going to negate the Shloshim, we will certainly allow the oval to take a haircut on Erev Shabbos. In this case, we know for sure that the arrival of Yom Tov on Motzei Shabbos is going to negate the Shloshim, and therefore he's allowed to take a haircut on Erev Shabbos. Since he can't possibly take a haircut on Shabbos, so then it's as if Friday is already day 8. Okay. Continues the Mechaber, 4 lines down in the middle of the line. Let's say in one of these cases, when it was mutter for the oval to take a haircut on Erev Yom Tov, he didn't take a haircut. Mutter legaleach achar regel. He's allowed to take a haircut after Yom Tov. Yeah, he's allowed to take a haircut after Yom Tov because the arrival of Yom Tov broke the Shloshim. So he should have taken a haircut l'chvod regel on Erev Yom Tov. He didn't. He's still allowed to take one after Yom Tov. The arrival of Yom Tov is still mevatel the Shloshim, so he'll be allowed to take a haircut after Yom Tov. Shahari kfar nispatli mimenu gzera Shloshim, because the arrival of Yom Tov ends the Shloshim. Avol b'soich haregel lo yigaleach. But on Chol HaMoed, he will not be allowed to take a haircut. Because this is like anybody else who's not allowed to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed. The only time you're not allowed to take, the only time you're allowed to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed is if you had one of the oinsim that we discussed previously. If you were let out of jail on Erev Yom Tov, close to the beginning of Yom Tov, so then we understand that you were an onus before Yom Tov, you weren't able to take a haircut. That's why you weren't mekayim what the Chachamim say, that you're not allowed to, that you can't come into the Yom Tov kishuhu menuvel. So we understand you weren't able to. So then you're allowed to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed. But this Avil was allowed to take a haircut on Erev Yom Tov. He was Pesheya. He didn't take a haircut on Erev Yom Tov. So then he's not allowed to take one on Chol HaMoed. Let's say the last day of Shiva fell out on Shabbos, that was Erev Yom Tov. So he was sitting Shiva on Friday. Friday wasn't day 7 of Shiva. Friday was day 6 of Shiva. Then mutar legalech b'chol hamayid. Then he's allowed to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed, kevin shaloi hayev shaloi legalech kaidim, because he wasn't allowed to take a haircut on Erev HaRegel. If the 6th day of Shiva is Erev Yom Tov, what does Miktas Hayom Kikulei help you? Very nice. You sat Shiva in the morning, but you have to continue sitting Shiva for the whole day. It's day 6. Your Shiva's not over. And l'chvod haregel, you have no heter to take a haircut. It's day 6 of Shiva. We're not going to be matter you on Shiva. We're matter you to take a haircut if day 7 is Erev Yom Tov, because Miktas Hayom Kikulei and Shiva is over. Shloshim began, so to take a haircut during Shloshim will be matter l'chvod haregel. But in this case, we're not matter to take a haircut l'chvod haregel on day 6 of Shiva. So then you're allowed to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed. Continues the Mechaber in Sif Tes. Ha de regel mevatel gzera shloshim. This halacha that the arrival of Yom Tov negates the shloshim, b'shar mesim. That applies to 5 of the close relatives that you're mechuyev to hold aveilus for a son, a daughter, a brother, a sister, and a spouse. Avol ba'aviv v'imoi, but if somebody is an avol for a parent, for a father or a mother, she'asor l'saper ad sheyigaru boi chaverov. We know the halacha is that the aval is not allowed to take a haircut until a friend of his comes over and says, you really need a haircut. In that case, afilu paga b'aregel la'achar shloshim yom. Then even if Yom Tov arrives after the shloshim is already completed, eino mevatel, he's still not allowed to go take a haircut. Says the Mishnah Berurah, is cut in lamadalit ad sheyigaru v'im garu bay, and if somebody does come over to him and tell him, you need a haircut, af b'yom shloshim mutter. Even on the last day of shloshim, it would be mutter for him to take a haircut, because again, we will apply the halacha of miktas hayom kikulei, and we'll say that the last day of shloshim is the morning of the last day of shloshim completes the shloshim, and now the rest of the day already has the din of the rest of the year, where if his friend tells him he needs a haircut, he's allowed to go take a haircut. Okay, now we go to Sif Yud. V'emchal echad mimei ha'avelus chutz me'ashvi be'erev haregel. If another day of the Shiva falls out on Erev Yom Tov, so let's say day 5 of Shiva falls out on Erev Yom Tov, what's going to happen now? Since he already started sitting Shiva before Yom Tov, so when Yom Tov comes, Yom Tov is going to negate the Shiva. Yom Tov is going to end the Shiva. V'emchal echad mimei aveilus chutz me'ashvi be'erev haregel. So v'emchal echad mimei aveilus chutz me'ashvi be'erev haregel mutar lechabes. The avel is allowed to launder. However, he's not allowed to wear the freshly washed clothes until night. And it would be proper to refrain from doing laundry until after chatzos, so that it should be clear to all that he is laundering for the needs of Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kat Lamed Hey, Echad b'mei ha'aveilus. Afilu Yom Rishon. Let's say the first day of Shiva falls out on Erev Yom Tov. Kat Lamed Vav, Motor lechabes. He's allowed to do laundry. Tekevin de balayla iev shelo lechabes b'pnei Yom Tov, because since he's not going to be able to do laundry on Yom Tov, hitir loy b'yoyim b'pnei haregel. And Yom Tov, the arrival of Yom Tov is going to break the Shiva. He's allowed to go ahead and do the laundry during the day on Erev Yom Tov, l'chvayda regel. Aval tispeiris aser ad shloishim. However, taking a haircut would be aser. And the reason for this distinction is because laundering is aser during Shiva, but it's mutter during shloishim. Now we know that once the arrival of Yom Tov comes, Shiva is going to be over, and then really would start Shloshim. So since technically speaking, once the arrival of Yom Tov comes, all the dinim of Shiva end. So then today on Erev Yom Tov, we already allow the oval to launder l'chvaid haregel. But that's not the case when it comes to taking a haircut. Taking a haircut is usher during Shiva. It's also usher during Shloshim. So even though the arrival of Yom Tov is going to negate the Shiva, it's still going to be Shloshim. Therefore, on Erev Yom Tov, he's not going to be allowed to take a haircut. On Achar Chatzos, he should refrain preferably from doing laundry until after Chatzos, because the Mechaber said so that it should be it should be clear to all that he's laundering l'chvayid Yom Tov. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ladas Ramah le'el b'sif ches, according to the Ramah that we learned earlier in this year, who said that the oval should refrain from bathing until close to nightfall, until close to Yom Tov. Why? So that it should be recognizable to all that he's bathing l'chvayid haregel. The same halacha would apply here. Lo yechabes ad samach le'erev. The oval in this case should refrain from laundering until close to Yom Tov. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Thank you for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schos of limud HaTorah should stand Gans Klal Yisrael in good stead. The Rebbeinu Shem should be Megan on Gans Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shem should send Yeshuas, Refuas, and Parnasa to all those in need, and we should be Zaycha to see the Bias Kol Tzedek B'Meher V'Yameinu. Be well.